The sun was rising on the horizon when John Sullivan adjusted his worn straw hat and contemplated the expanse of his farm. At 75 years old, every inch of that land told a story that intertwined with his own. His calloused fingers caressed the neck of Valor, his faithful white horse and companion of 15 years, who seemed to understand every sigh of the old farmer. "Today's going to be a good day, my friend," murmured John, observing the clouds that promised an afternoon of light. Rain, exactly what his crops needed. The horse whinnied softly as if agreeing. There was something special about Valor, an almost supernatural intelligence that everyone in the region commented on. The animal usually reacted to the emotions of people around him, and at times seemed to predict events before they even occurred. "Grandpa! Grandpa!" Mary's voice, his 25-year-old granddaughter, echoed across the yard as she approached running. "The creek's level is lower today. I think we need to check what's happening." John nodded, concerned. The creek that cut through his property was vital not only for his farm, but for the entire surrounding community. Mary, with her knowledge in agronomy, had been the first to notice the subtle changes that had been occurring over the past few months. "Let's take a look after breakfast," he replied, walking with difficulty toward the simple but welcoming house that had sheltered generations of the Sullivan family. In the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee and homemade bread filled the air. Ellen, John's daughter and Mary's mother, stirred a pot on the wood stove. Her face, marked by time just like her father's, lit up when she saw them. "You're worried about the creek again, aren't you?" she asked, pouring strong coffee into enamel mugs. "Jack from Palm Hill Farm passed by yesterday and said the water barely reaches his crops now." "Something wrong is happening," affirmed Mary, biting a piece of bread. "At college, we're studying exactly how interventions in waterways can affect an entire ecosystem. This can't be natural." John remained silent, thoughtful. He knew that his land would face challenges, but he never imagined it would be in his final years of life. He felt the weight of responsibility not only to his family but to the entire community that depended on those waters. Breakfast was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of a powerful engine approaching on the dirt road. Valor, who had been grazing peacefully near the house, suddenly raised his head and whinnied loudly, a signal that John knew well. "He's coming earlier this time," murmured the old man, rising with a tired sigh. Through the window, they saw the gleaming black car parking in front of the house. Richard Montgomery, a middle-aged businessman with impeccable clothes that completely contrasted with the rural environment, got out of the vehicle, accompanied by two men in formal attire. "What does that man want now?" asked Ellen, tensing her shoulders. "Aren't the 3 visits from last month enough?" John placed his wrinkled hand on his daughter's shoulder. "He wants what he's always wanted, daughter, our land." Mary observed the businessman approach with determined steps, as if he already owned the place. His angular face and expression of superiority made the young woman's blood boil. "Mr. Sullivan," called Montgomery with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I hope you've reconsidered my offer. The price is more than fair for this property." John went out to the porch, maintaining the dignity that had always characterized him. "Good morning, Mr. Montgomery. As I've said before, this land is not for sale, not for all the money in the world." The smile on the businessman's face instantly disappeared. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm a patient man, but my patience has limits. Progress doesn't wait for sentimental old men. My resort will be built with or without your cooperation." Valor slowly approached, positioning himself beside John like a silent guardian. The horse stared at Montgomery with disturbing intensity, which made one of the businessman's assistants take a step back, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm not here to negotiate, Sullivan. I'm here to inform," declared Montgomery, adjusting his impeccable suit. "The Blue Lake Resort project has already been approved by the authorities. Your little farm is just a detail on the map of progress." Mary stepped forward, positioning herself beside her grandfather. "A detail that has sustained families for generations. This land feeds people, Mr. Montgomery, not egos." The businessman looked at her with contempt. "Impressive. The granddaughter inherited the grandfather's stubbornness. Listen, Miss College student, this piece of land could be transformed into something much greater. Jobs, tourism, development. But you prefer to live in the past. Valor whinnied loudly, stomping the ground forcefully. The animal seemed to share the family's indignation. "Control that." "Animal," ordered Montgomery, taking a step back, "or I'll have to take measures." John made a gentle gesture and Valor immediately calmed down. The connection between the two was something many tried to understand, but few could. "You have a week to reconsider," finalized the businessman, turning to leave. "After that, I won't guarantee such favorable conditions." When the car disappeared around the bend of the dirt road, leaving a cloud of dust behind, Mary turned to her grandfather with determination in her eyes. "Grandpa, we need to find out what's happening with the creek. I have a feeling this has something to do with Montgomery's threats." John nodded, feeling the same uneasiness. "Let's check the watercourse, from the highest to the lowest point on the property." Ellen, who had been watching everything from the porch, approached. "I'll call some neighbors. If something's happening with our water, everyone needs to know." After a quick lunch, John and Mary mounted Valor and headed to the point where the creek entered their lands. The day was hot, and the relentless sun punished the vegetation, making the decreased water flow even more concerning. "Look, Grandpa," pointed Mary when they reached the source. "The volume here is normal, but as it advances through the property, it diminishes. That doesn't make sense." John dismounted with difficulty, leaning on a cane he rarely used. His experienced eyes examined the creek banks, noticing small changes in the terrain that ordinary people wouldn't perceive. "Someone has been interfering here," he murmured, pointing to subtle marks of recent excavation. "Let's follow the course." They continued their investigation for almost 2 hours, with Valor showing increasing restlessness as they approached the property boundaries. Suddenly, the horse stopped, refusing to advance, his ears alert. "What is it, my friend?" asked John, caressing the animal's neck. Mary dismounted and walked a few meters ahead, disappearing into the dense vegetation. Seconds later, her alarmed voice cut through the silence. "Grandpa, come see this." John hurried as much as his legs allowed, following his granddaughter's voice. What they found left them perplexed. A concrete structure had been strategically built in the creek bed, diverting part of the water to an artificial channel that headed toward neighboring lands, recently acquired by an unknown company. "This is illegal," affirmed Mary, photographing everything with her cell phone. "They're diverting water without authorization." John examined the construction more closely and noticed something that made his blood freeze. Small identification plates on the equipment used, with the logo of Montgomery and Associates Construction. "So this is how he intends to force us to sell," said John, his voice trembling with indignation. "Cutting our water, suffocating our crops until we have no choice." Mary hugged her grandfather, feeling the fragility in his shoulders that carried the weight of decades. "We won't let this happen, Grandpa. I have contacts at the university, professors who can help us. This is an environmental crime." On the way back, they met Peter, an old friend of John and local community leader. He listened attentively as they explained the situation. "This affects the entire community," concluded Peter, concerned. "The creek is vital for all of us. We need an urgent meeting." "At my house tomorrow at dusk," suggested John. "Everyone needs to know what's happening." When they returned to the farm, the sky was beginning to darken, heralding the rain everyone was expecting. Ellen waited for them on the porch, her face tense. "You took so long that I was worried," she said. "Did you find anything?" Mary showed the photos she had taken. "More than we expected, Mum. Montgomery is playing dirty." That night, as a light rain began to fall, John remained awake, watching through the window. Valor, unusually, had not retired to the stable, preferring to stay near the house as if standing guard. The old farmer felt more than ever that the animal understood the gravity of the situation. "What will we do, my friend?" whispered John to the night. "This land is all we have, all we are." Lightning illuminated the sky, and for a moment John glimpsed Valor's silhouette imposing against the horizon. In that instant he felt a renewed determination. This would not just be a fight for land, it would be a fight for his legacy, for his family, and for an entire community that depended on this piece of America that he loved so much. The Sullivan family's living room had never received so many people at the same time. Farmers from all over the region, some that John knew only from greeting at Sunday markets, gathered on that hot afternoon, their faces marked by concern and indignation. The murmur of voices ceased when the old farmer stood up, leaning on his cane. "Thank you all for coming," began John, his voice firm despite his age. "The reason for this meeting affects not only my family, but all of us who depend on the creek to survive." Mary projected the photos of the illegal structure on the wall, using a small projector borrowed from the university. Exclamations of surprise and indignation echoed through the room. "As you can see," explained the young woman, "someone has built an illegal dam that diverts much of the water that should follow its natural course, and we have evidence that Richard Montgomery is behind this." "The luxury resort man?" asked Mrs. Connie, a woman who had been producing artisanal cheeses for more than 40 years. "He tried to buy my property last month." Similar reports emerged, forming a clear pattern. Montgomery was acquiring strategic lands in the region and pressuring those who refused to sell. "He wants to transform our valley into a playground for the rich," commented Peter bitterly, "and he doesn't care about destroying our way of life to do it." "What can we do?" asked a young farmer son of old acquaintances of John. "We're just small landowners against a powerful businessman." It was then that Louise, the environmental law professor and Mary's advisor at the university, stood up. A woman in her 50s, with a determined look and proud posture. "The law is on our side," she affirmed with conviction. "What Montgomery is doing is a clear environmental crime. Diverting a waterway without authorization from the proper agencies is illegal, and we have proof of that." "And how long will it take for justice to be done?" questioned someone at the back of the room. "By then our crops will have dried up." A murmur of agreement traveled through the environment. John realized they needed more immediate actions. "We need to act on two fronts," he proposed. "Formally report to the authorities, yes, but also take practical measures to protect our water and our lands." Mary stepped forward. "I have a proposal. At the university, we're studying rainwater collection and storage techniques, as well as irrigation methods that save up to 60% of traditional consumption. We can implement this on our properties while we fight legally." The meeting extended for hours, with ideas coming from all sides. One group offered to check for other possible interventions in the creek's course. Another proposed organizing a rotation system to monitor suspicious activities in the vicinity. A third group, led by Louise, began gathering documentation for formal complaints. While the neighbors debated animatedly, John went outside to breathe the night air. He found Valor near the porch, as if following everything. "We're building something important here, my friend," whispered the old man, caressing the horse's neck. "A resistance." The animal whinnied softly, resting his muzzle on John's shoulder in an almost human gesture of solidarity. "Mr. John," the voice of Clara, a young local journalist, interrupted the moment. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" John nodded, inviting her to sit beside him on the porch bench. "I heard about what's happening," she explained. "I work for the regional newspaper and want to write an article about this. People need to know what Montgomery is doing." A light of hope shone in the tired eyes of the old farmer. "It would be wonderful to have the press on our side, young lady." "That's not all," continued Clara, showing something on her tablet. "I researched Montgomery's other developments. There's a pattern of environmental irregularities, unfulfilled promises of local job creation, and even cases of harassment against small property owners." John examined the documents she showed, feeling a mixture of indignation and validation. "He's done this before, then?" "Several times," confirmed Clara, "but this time he's found an organized community." When the meeting ended, it was already past midnight, but no one seemed tired. There was a renewed energy, a sense of shared purpose that John hadn't seen in that community for many years. The next day, the mobilization began. Groups of farmers inspected every inch of the creek, documenting 2 other smaller diversion structures. Louise and her team of law students prepared legal notifications and reports to environmental agencies. Mary organized workshops on water conservation techniques, moving from property to property with contagious enthusiasm. John observed everything with a mixture of pride and concern. He knew that Montgomery's reaction wouldn't be long in coming, and it would probably be merciless. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone in that fight. A week after the meeting, Clara's article was published on the front page of the regional newspaper. Rural Community Unites Against Environmental Destruction. The piece detailed the illegal actions of Montgomery's company and the resistance movement that was forming. That same afternoon, the businessman's black car raised dust on the farm road. This time Montgomery wasn't alone. Besides his usual assistants, 2 men with the appearance of security guards accompanied him. "You don't know who you're messing with, old man," bellowed Montgomery, throwing the newspaper at John's feet. "This report is full of lies and defamation." John remained calm, standing on the porch of his house. At his side, Valor observed attentively, his ears erect as a sign of alert. "Every word in that newspaper is supported by evidence, Mr. Montgomery," replied the farmer. "Just like the complaints that have already been filed in your name with the environmental agencies." The businessman's face contorted into a mask of fury. "You think your little complaints will stop me? I have powerful friends, Sullivan. You and your hillbilly neighbors are no match for me." "Perhaps not," admitted John serenely, "but together we are stronger than you imagine." The tension increased in the days following the confrontation with Montgomery. The community, now united, maintained constant vigilance over the creek and neighboring properties. Clara's article had resonated beyond expectations, reaching the capital's newspapers and attracting the attention of environmental organizations. On a particularly hot afternoon, Mary was working in the small improvised laboratory she had set up in the farm's barn. The young agronomist was analyzing soil samples collected from different points on the property, part of a project she had started at the university. "This is fascinating," she murmured to herself, adjusting the microscope. "It can't be a coincidence." John entered the barn, curious about what kept his granddaughter so absorbed. "Discovered something interesting, my girl?" Mary raised her eyes, a gleam of excitement in her look. "Grandpa, remember when I told you about my research project on medicinal plants adapted to our biome? Well, I think I found something really special." She showed her grandfather slides with soil samples and photographs of a delicate flowered plant that grew discreetly in some corners of the property. "This is Artemisia sanctus," explained Mary. "An extremely rare and valuable medicinal plant. Normally it needs very specific conditions to thrive, but for some reason it's developing naturally on our land." John examined the images with interest. "I've seen these flowers. They grow near the creek's source, don't they?" "Exactly," confirmed Mary enthusiastically. "And that's not all. Professor Martin, a specialist in medicinal botany, was impressed with the samples I took. According to him, our variety has a concentration of active principles superior to those found in other regions." "And that's important?" asked John, trying to understand his granddaughter's excitement. "Important. Grandpa, Artemisia sanctus is used in the production of medications for pulmonary and circulatory diseases. Laboratories pay fortunes for quality. Plantations and our land seems to be perfect for its cultivation." The old farmer was beginning to understand the magnitude of the discovery. "You're saying we could cultivate this plant commercially?" "Not just cultivate," clarified Mary. "We could establish a research and sustainable production center. Professor Martin has already mentioned the possibility of a partnership with the university and ethical laboratories that value traditional knowledge." John felt a different emotion growing in his chest. It wasn't just hope, but a completely new vision for the future of his land. "We need to be careful with this information," he warned, after a few moments of reflection. "If Montgomery discovers this, he'll have one more reason to try to take our lands." Mary agreed. "For now, only Professor Martin and some trusted colleagues know about this. We're preparing a complete study before any announcement." That night, John shared the news only with Ellen and Peter, his closest friend and community leader. The 4 sat on the porch, planning the next steps, while Valor grazed peacefully in the field near the house. "This changes everything," commented Peter, excited. "If we can prove the medicinal and scientific value of this land, we'll have an even stronger argument against the resort. And not just that, added Ellen. We could create a cooperative that would benefit the entire community, not just our family. The conversation was interrupted when Valor suddenly raised his head, his ears attentive. John knew that behavior. The horse had perceived something. Someone's watching us, whispered the old man, signaling for everyone to remain silent. Peter discreetly stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, pretending to admire the night. From the corner of his eye he noticed a shadow moving among the trees. There, he murmured, subtly pointing. John made a sign to Valor, a silent command, that the animal understood perfectly. The horse whinnied loudly and galloped toward the trees. Seconds later they heard the sound of hurried footsteps and the noise of an engine being started in haste. Someone was spying on us, concluded Peter, concerned. One of Montgomery's men, probably, said John. They must be monitoring our movements. The next day, Mary received a call from Professor Martin that confirmed their suspicions. I received a curious visit today, he told her, a man claiming to represent a group of investors interested in research on medicinal plants in the region. He asked several specific questions about your project. Did you mention the Artemisia? Asked Mary, apprehensive. Of course not, assured the professor. I followed your advice to keep everything secret for now, but something tells me he already knew what he was looking for. The confirmation that they were being watched increased the family's vigilance. John decided it was time to accelerate the plans. Mary, how long would it take to prepare a complete presentation on the Artemisia? With the professor's help, maybe 2 weeks, she replied. Why? We need to act before Montgomery discovers everything, explained John. Let's prepare a presentation for the community and invite authorities, press and experts. If we make the knowledge public, it will be harder for him to attack us. The news of the scientific discovery spread quickly among the closest circle, bringing a new wave of hope. Charles, a young lawyer born in the community, who now worked in the capital, offered help to register patents and legally protect the discovery. If we can prove that this specific variety only grows under these unique conditions, we create additional protection against the destruction of the area, he explained during a visit. While preparations advanced, Valor began to demonstrate an even more protective behavior. The horse rarely moved away from the main house and reacted immediately to any unusual movement in the vicinity. John, who had always believed in the animal's exceptional intelligence, now saw its loyalty manifest in an even deeper way. 2 nights before the date set for the presentation, John woke up to Valor's loud and alarmed whinny. Looking out the hay window, he saw flames rising from the barn, where Mary kept her samples and equipment. Fire! He shouted, waking Ellen and Mary. The laboratory is on fire! The family rushed outside, along with the 2 workers who slept in a room attached to the main house. The flames rapidly consumed the wooden structure, threatening to destroy months of research and crucial evidence. It was then that they witnessed something extraordinary. Valor, contrary to the natural instinct of horses to flee from fire, ran toward the burning barn. With precise movements, the animal knocked down the door partially blocked by debris and entered the burning building. Valor, no, shouted John desperately, trying to follow the animal but being restrained by Peter, who had just arrived, attracted by the fire's glow. Moments later, to everyone's astonishment, Valor emerged from the flames, carrying in his mouth a metal box, the container where Mary kept her most valuable samples and her main notes. Smoke still hung over the charred remains of the barn when the first rays of sunlight appeared on the horizon. John, sitting on the porch, observed the Sullivan family and their closest friends, taking turns removing the debris and assessing the damage. His gaze, however, was fixed on Valor, who rested under the shade of a nearby maple tree. "You need to rest a bit," said Clara, the young journalist who had arrived early to cover the incident. It was a long night for everyone. John slowly shook his head. 75 years on this land, young lady, and I've never seen anything like what that horse did yesterday. Clara followed the old farmer's gaze. Everyone's talking about it. It's almost unbelievable. He knew exactly what he was doing, continued John, his voice choked with emotion. He went straight to Mary's sample box as if he understood the importance of those documents. The journalist made some notes in her notebook. "May I ask about that box? What was inside that was so important?" John hesitated, considering how much he could reveal. The fire clearly hadn't been accidental, and disclosing Mary's discovery before the official presentation could be risky. On the other hand, the secret had been discovered, and perhaps the best protection now would be public exposure. "Mary discovered something special growing on our land," he finally explained. "A plant with valuable medicinal properties. The box contained samples and her research notes. And you believe the fire is related to this discovery?" John looked at the journalist seriously. "Do you think it's a coincidence that our barn catches fire exactly 2 days before we present the results of this research to the community and authorities?" Clara nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We need to make this public immediately. If it's news, it becomes harder for whoever it is to try again." Mary approached, her face marked by fatigue and smudged with soot. In her hands, she carried the metal box that Valor had saved. "I managed to save the essentials," she informed, showing the preserved contents. "The main samples are intact, and I have digital backups of the most important analyses stored in the cloud." "A sensible precaution," commented Clara. "Your grandfather was telling me about your discovery. Do you think the fire is related?" "I'm absolutely certain," affirmed Mary with determination. "And I know exactly who's behind this." The arrival of Professor Martin, accompanied by 2 environmental police officers and a fire investigation specialist, interrupted the conversation. While the group examined the debris, John approached Valor. "How did you know, my friend?" he whispered, caressing the animal's neck. "What else do you understand that we humans don't perceive?" The horse responded with a soft whinny, resting, his muzzle on the old man's shoulder, as he had done since he was a colt. For a moment, John had the impression of a communication deeper than words. After hours of investigation, the specialist confirmed what everyone already suspected. The fire had been deliberately set. They found traces of accelerant and signs that the main door had been blocked from outside. "This is very serious," declared one of the officers. "We'll need detailed statements and a formal investigation will be opened." Professor Martin, who had been examining the samples saved by Valor, called John and Mary to a more private corner. "The attempt to destroy your research confirms what we suspected," he said in a low voice. "The concentration of bioactive compounds in this Artemisia variety is extraordinary. This could revolutionize the treatment of various respiratory conditions, and makes our land even more valuable," completed John. "Precisely," agreed the professor. "I suggest we accelerate our presentation. We can't wait 2 more weeks." Mary nodded. "Can we organize something for tomorrow itself, at the community church?" "The sooner the better," confirmed the professor. "I'll bring some colleagues from the university to give scientific weight to the presentation." The news of the emergency presentation spread quickly through the community. Clara published a preliminary article in the online newspaper mentioning the scientific discovery without going into specific details, but highlighting the criminal fire and Valor's extraordinary action. At dusk, while preparations for the next day's event continued, Richard Montgomery's car appeared on the farm road. This time the businessman came alone, an unusual approach that immediately made John suspicious. "I came to express my condolences for the incident," said Montgomery, in a falsely concerned tone. "Fires are always tragic in the countryside." John remained silent, just observing the man who was trying to appear sincere. "I heard there was valuable research equipment in the barn," continued the businessman. "What an unfortunate coincidence." "Coincidence?" repeated John, finally breaking his silence. "Nothing that has happened on my land in recent months has been a coincidence, Mr. Montgomery." The businessman adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable, with the implicit accusation. "I understand you're upset, but to insinuate that I would have something to do with such a regrettable incident is defamatory." "I made no insinuation," replied John calmly. "I merely observed that coincidences have been frequent lately. You yourself came to that conclusion." Valor, who had been grazing near the house, raised his head upon hearing Montgomery's voice. The horse approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the businessman. "Your horse doesn't seem to like me much," commented Montgomery, taking a step back. "Valor has good judgment of character," replied John simply. The businessman changed tactics. "Actually, I came to offer help. I heard your granddaughter is conducting important research on medicinal plants. My company could finance this work, provide adequate laboratories, specialized staff." "In exchange for what?" interrupted John. "Partnership," answered Montgomery smoothly. "I recognize value when I see it, Mr. Sullivan. We can be allies instead of adversaries. Your family keeps the property, receives royalties for the development of the compounds, and my company handles the commercial part." Before John could respond, Mary approached, having heard part of the conversation. "Curious that you know so much about our research," she observed coldly, "considering we've only shared the details with a very restricted circle of people." Montgomery smiled tensely. "News travels fast in small towns, Miss Mary, and I have contacts in academic circles. And I suppose these contacts also informed you about our presentation tomorrow?" she asked, studying the businessman's reaction. A brief flash of surprise crossed Montgomery's face, confirming that he didn't know about the event. "Presentation," he repeated, trying to maintain his composure. "For the community and authorities," explained Mary, "about the Artemisia Sanctus and its unique value on our lands. Consider yourself invited, Mr. Montgomery. Perhaps you'll learn something about the true value of this place." The businessman took a few steps back, his plan clearly destabilized. "Unfortunately, I have commitments tomorrow, but my partnership offer stands." When Montgomery entered his car and left, John exchanged a significant look with his granddaughter. "He'll try something before the presentation," said the old farmer. Mary nodded. "We're counting on it. Professor Martin is already on his way with the backup copies of all the research, and Peter has organized a group to watch the farm tonight." John looked at Valor, who remained alert, as if he also understood the gravity of the moment. "And we have our most faithful guardian," he murmured, a plan beginning to form in his mind. "Mary, call Professor Sanders, that equine behavior specialist who visited the farm last year. I have an idea that might help us tomorrow." The community church had never been so full. Residents from all neighboring properties squeezed into the wooden benches, while press representatives, municipal authorities, and researchers occupied the front rows. The buzz of conversation ceased when John Sullivan climbed onto the small improvised stage, accompanied by Mary and Professor Martin. "Thank you all for coming," began the old farmer, his voice firm despite his age. "What we're going to share today doesn't just concern my family, but our entire community and the future we can build together." At the back of the church, Richard Montgomery observed attentively, having changed his unavoidable commitments to be present. At his side, two men in suits discreetly recorded the presentation on their cell phones. Mary took the floor, projecting images of Artemisia Sanctus on the white wall. "This rare medicinal plant has extraordinary properties," she explained, presenting graphs and analyses that demonstrated the species' potential. "And for reasons we're still investigating scientifically, it grows with exceptional concentrations of active principles in our region, especially on the Sullivan family lands." Professor Martin complemented the explanation with technical data, emphasizing the potential for treating chronic respiratory diseases and even promising components for research against neurodegenerative conditions. "What we have here," concluded the scientist, "is not just a plant, but a biodiverse treasure that needs to be studied and preserved in its natural habitat." A murmur of admiration traveled through the audience. Clara, the journalist, raised her hand for the first question. "What would be the economic impact of sustainable cultivation of this plant for the community?" Mary smiled. "That's the most exciting part of the project." She then presented slides detailing a community cooperative plan for controlled cultivation and initial processing of the Artemisia, with partnerships with universities and ethical laboratories. "We estimate that with full implementation, we could generate jobs for at least 70% of local families, with an average income 3 times higher than the current one, fully preserving our way of life and our ecosystem." The presentation continued for almost an hour, with enthusiastic questions and discussions about technical and practical aspects. John observed everything with pride, especially when noting Montgomery's increasingly closed countenance. The event seemed to be heading toward its conclusion. The church doors opened, and a whisper of surprise traveled through the assembly. Valor, led by Professor Sanders, entered majestically through the central aisle. "As part of our presentation," announced John, "we would like to demonstrate another extraordinary aspect of our lands, the unique connection between the beings that inhabit it." Professor Sanders, a renowned specialist in equine behavior, took the floor. "What you will see now defies conventional explanations about animal intelligence," he explained. "Valor is not a horse trained with commands for presentations. What he demonstrates is a form of understanding and connection that my scientific colleagues would find difficult to classify." In the 20 minutes that followed, the audience watched in astonishment as Valor demonstrated impressive capabilities, identifying specific medicinal plants among various samples, responding to complex verbal commands, and, most surprisingly, reacting appropriately to problem situations presented in real time. "This horse saved crucial research during the criminal fire on our property," revealed John, provoking exclamations of amazement. "He not only entered a burning building, contrary to the natural equine instinct, but precisely located and rescued the most valuable material." Professor Sanders added, "In my 4-decade career studying equines, I have never documented a case with this level of apparent situational understanding and interspecies bond." Mary concluded, "What we want to demonstrate is that our land is not just a piece of ground with real estate value. It's a complex ecosystem where each element, from rare medicinal plants to extraordinary animals like Valor, forms an interconnected web that we need to preserve." A representative from the State Environmental Department requested to speak. "In light of what we've seen today, we will immediately initiate procedures to declare the region as an area of special scientific and environmental interest, which will offer additional legal protections against real estate speculation and predatory development." The audience erupted in applause while Montgomery abruptly rose, heading for the exit. His face, contorted in a mask of frustration, made it clear that the presentation had achieved its objective. After the event, while the community celebrated outside the church, the mayor approached John and Mary. "This changes everything for our region," he commented, visibly impressed. "The Medicinal Plant Cooperative Project will put our town on the map for sustainable biotechnology. Cert, and the equine therapy project with Valor could help many children," added Mary, referring to a part of the presentation that had addressed the therapeutic potential of the extraordinary human-animal bond demonstrated by her grandfather and the horse. Professor Martin joined the group, accompanied by a woman whom John didn't immediately recognize. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Dr. Helen Rivers from the International Biodiversity Foundation," introduced the professor. "She came especially for our presentation and has an interesting proposal." The woman extended her hand with a warm smile. "Mr. Sullivan, what I saw today goes beyond a botanical discovery or a community project. It's a living example of how sustainable development and traditional preservation can walk together." "We're just trying to protect what we love, Doctor," replied John humbly. "And that's exactly why my foundation would like to offer full funding for the research center your granddaughter proposed, on the condition that it be managed by the community and maintain its principles of sustainability." John felt his eyes moisten. That support meant the immediate viability of the project that until then had seemed like a distant dream. On the way back to the farm, accompanied by friends and supporters who would gather for a small celebration, John and Mary led Valor with pride. The horse walked serenely, as if he understood the magnitude of what they had accomplished. "He seems satisfied, doesn't he?" commented Mary, observing the animal. "Valor always knew what was at stake," replied John, caressing the horse's neck. "Sometimes I think he understands more about this land than we humans do." When they arrived at the property, they found Peter waiting with urgent news. "The environmental inspection just shut down all of Montgomery's illegal works on the creek course, and the police are investigating the fire as a premeditated environmental crime." A wave of relief traveled through the group. The battle was not yet completely won, but the tide had definitely turned in favor of the community. While everyone celebrated on the porch, John moved away for a few moments, walking slowly, to the highest point of the property. From there he could contemplate the extent of his lands bathed in the setting sun, the same lands that his ancestors had cultivated and protected for generations. He felt a familiar presence at his side. Valor had silently followed his steps, and was now observing the same horizon. "We did it, my friend," whispered John, his voice choked with emotion. "We preserved our home." The horse whinnied softly, resting his muzzle on the old farmer's shoulder, a gesture that, to any ordinary observer, would seem like simple animal affection, but that John knew carried a much deeper understanding. Together, man and horse contemplated the future they had helped build, a future where the ancestral wisdom of the land and modern scientific knowledge would unite to create something truly extraordinary. 3 months had passed since the presentation at the community church. The Sullivan farm had transformed into a center of constant activity. In the old barn, now rebuilt and expanded, a modern laboratory functioned where Mary and a team of researchers studied the properties of Artemisia sanctus. Next door, a nursery housed seedlings of the medicinal plant that would be distributed among members of the newly formed community cooperative. John observed the changes with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. Sitting on the house porch, he watched the comings and goings of people, scientists, local farmers, university students, all working together on a project that had transformed not only his property, but the entire region. "Seems like there are too many people on this land, doesn't it, old friend?" joked Peter, sitting beside his friend. "Remember when it was just the two of us complaining about the drought and shooting the breeze?" John smiled. "I confess that sometimes I miss that peace, but seeing all these people united for something good, it's worth it." "And the news from town?" asked Peter. "I heard the case against Montgomery is advancing." "Clara called me yesterday," confirmed John. "The police found evidence linking one of his henchmen directly to the fire, and the environmental violations have resulted in heavy fines. It seems our friend's empire is crumbling." Peter nodded, satisfied. "Slow justice, but it arrives." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unfamiliar car. An elegant woman in her 40s got out of the vehicle and walked hesitantly toward the porch. "Mr. Sullivan?" she called. "My name is Laura Montgomery. Was Richard's wife." John and Peter exchanged surprised looks. The old farmer stood up, politely. "Mrs. Montgomery, how can I help you?" The woman seemed nervous, carefully choosing her words. "I've come to apologize for what Richard did to your family and this community. I know words can't repair damage, but I needed to come personally." John indicated a chair, inviting her to sit. "I wasn't expecting your visit, but I appreciate your consideration." "There's more," continued Laura, accepting the invitation. "I'm divorcing Richard. The investigations revealed business dealings I was completely unaware of, practices that go against everything I believe in." Peter discreetly withdrew, leaving the two to speak in privacy. "I understand," replied John, showing no judgment. "It must be a difficult time for you as well." "The reason for my visit goes beyond apologies," explained Laura, gaining confidence. "As part of the divorce agreement, I'm taking control of some of the company's assets, among them the lands that Richard acquired around your property for the resort." John felt a twinge of apprehension. Could this be a new pressure tactic? "And what do you intend to do with those lands?" he asked cautiously. Laura took a deep breath. "I want to donate them to expand the conservation and research project you've initiated, with one condition, that they be used to benefit the entire community, not just an individual or group." The surprise on the old farmer's face was evident. "That's unexpected, Mrs. Montgomery." "Laura, please," she corrected with a shy smile. "I've always been an environmentalist, Mr. Sullivan. I graduated in biology, but when I married Richard, I ended up moving away from those ideals. What your family and this community have built here is exactly the kind of project I've always dreamed of supporting." John tried to process the surprising proposal. This would need to be discussed with the entire cooperative, you understand? I no longer make decisions alone. Of course, Laura promptly agreed. Actually, I was hoping to formally present the proposal to the cooperative board. I've brought all the necessary documentation and am willing to work with you on terms that benefit everyone. At that moment, Mary appeared on the porch accompanied by Professor Martin and a team of researchers. Seeing the visitor, the young agronomist hesitated, recognizing her from news reports about the region's business elite. "Grandpa," she asked, approaching cautiously. John made the introductions, briefly explaining the reason for Laura's visit. Mary's initial surprise gave way to professional interest when Montgomery's ex-wife mentioned her biology background and her specialization in aquatic ecosystems. "That would be perfect for the creek recovery project," exclaimed Professor Martin, excited about the possibility of expanding the conservation area. While the group animatedly discussed the possibilities, John noticed that Valor was observing the scene from a distance under the shade of a tree. The old farmer knew his faithful companion well enough to know that the horse was evaluating the newcomer. "Would you like to meet Valor?" John asked Laura, interrupting the technical conversation. "He's a special part of this story." Laura smiled. "The famous horse everyone talks about? I'd love to." John led her to where Valor was resting. To everyone's surprise, the animal, usually cautious with strangers, calmly approached Laura, allowing her to caress his neck. "He likes you," commented John, observing the interaction with interest. "And Valor has a keen instinct for judging character." "Animals don't let themselves be fooled by appearances or words," replied Laura knowingly. "I grew up on a farm before moving to the city. I miss that connection with the land and animals." An idea began to form in John's mind. "You, Laura, mentioned you're a specialist in aquatic ecosystems. We've been facing challenges to fully recover the natural flow of the creek after the illegal interventions." "I'd love to help," she promptly offered. "Actually, I developed my doctoral thesis on recovering waterways degraded by human action." The impromptu meeting extended through the rest of the afternoon, with Laura naturally integrating with the group of researchers. Her expertise perfectly complemented Mary and Professor Martin's knowledge, creating new possibilities for the project. At dusk, when Montgomery's ex-wife prepared to leave, John accompanied her to her car. "You know, Laura, when that black car of Richard's appeared on the road, I felt my heart tighten with concern," confessed the old farmer. "Today, when I saw your car arriving, I had the same feeling. It's curious how life surprises us." "Sometimes we need courage to change direction," she replied, with a look that revealed her own journey of transformation. "Richard chose one path, and now I'm choosing mine." "The cooperative board meets next week," informed John. "It would be an honor to have you present to formally discuss your proposal." Laura nodded, visibly moved. "I'll be there. And, Mr. Sullivan, thank you for your openness. Many in your place would have closed the door upon hearing my last name." "This land has taught me that renewal is always possible," he replied simply. "For the soil, for plants, for animals, and for us humans too." When Laura's car disappeared, around the bend in the road, Mary approached her grandfather. "What do you think, Grandpa? Can we trust her?" John smiled, observing Valor, who was grazing peacefully in the nearby field. "Our friend seems to think so, and he's rarely wrong." "It would be quite a turnaround, wouldn't it?" commented Mary thoughtfully. "The wife of our greatest adversary becoming our ally." "Life rarely follows the script we imagine, my girl," philosophized the old farmer. "This land has survived for generations, not by blindly resisting change, but by knowing how to adapt and renew itself." As they walked back to the house, a comforting thought filled John's heart. That land which he loved so much and for which he had fought so hard would continue to flourish and transform lives long after he was gone. And perhaps his greatest legacy wouldn't be the preservation of an old way of life, but the creation of something new and promising that honored the past while embracing the future. 1 year had passed since Laura's surprising visit. The old Sullivan farm, now expanded with the lands donated by Montgomery's ex-wife, had transformed into the Green Valley Research and Preservation Center. The project that had begun as a form of resistance against real estate speculation had become a model of sustainable development, studied by universities across the country. On a sunny spring morning, John observed, from the top of a hill, the movement at the research center. At 76 years old, he still maintained an upright posture and attentive gaze, although his body was beginning to show the weight of decades of hard work. At his side, Valor grazed peacefully. The horse, now 16 years old, remained as majestic as ever, his white coat gleaming in the morning sun. "Impressive how everything changed in such a short time, isn't it, my old friend?" murmured John, caressing the animal's neck. Valor whinnied softly, as if agreeing. His fame had grown as much as the project, the horse that saved a community, as Clara had described him in her award-winning journalistic article. Animal behavior researchers came from far away to study his extraordinary capabilities, and the equine therapy program coordinated by Ellen served children from throughout the region. "Grandpa," Mary's voice echoed across the hill as she approached, accompanied by a group of visitors. "The representatives from the Department of the Environment have arrived for the ceremony." John adjusted his hat and smiled. This was a special day, the official signing of the decree that would transform the entire region into a sustainable development reserve, guaranteeing its permanent protection while allowing traditional communities to maintain their way of life. "We're heading to the auditorium," continued Mary, helping her grandfather to stand. "Everyone's waiting for you to begin." John mounted Valor with the surprising agility of someone who had spent his entire life on horseback. "Let's go, my friend. This is an important day for all of us." The auditorium, built with reforested wood and sustainable techniques, was packed. Authorities, researchers, journalists, and most importantly, members of the local community occupied every available seat. In the front row, Ellen, Laura, and Professor Martin conversed animatedly, while Professor Sanders, who now coordinated a research program on Valor's intelligence, organized his notes for the presentation. When John entered mounted on Valor, a respectful silence fell over the environment, followed by spontaneous applause. The old farmer dismounted with Peter's help and walked to the stage, where the Secretary of the Environment awaited him with a warm smile. "It's an honor to be here today," began the Secretary, addressing the audience. "What we witness in this place is an extraordinary example of what we can achieve when we unite traditional knowledge, modern science, and a truly sustainable vision of development." She continued, highlighting how the Green Valley Center had become an international reference in medicinal plant research, water resource conservation, and community development. "This decree is not just legal protection for this land, but a recognition of the innovative model you have created here." When it was John's turn to speak, a knot formed in his throat. His calloused hands held the microphone while his eyes scanned the auditorium, recognizing faces that had accompanied him on the journey, from neighbors who had stood by his side from the first day to the new partners who had joined along the way. "This land has always spoken to me," he began, his voice gaining firmness as he progressed. "Since I was a boy, when my father taught me to respect every inch of this ground, every drop of water, every living being that inhabited it. What we did here wasn't creating something new, but learning to listen to what the land has always tried to tell us." John briefly shared the story of the resistance against Montgomery, the discovery of Artemisia sanctus, and Valor's crucial role in decisive moments. "This horse," he said, pointing to the animal that waited serenely beside the stage, "understood the value of this land even before we, humans, fully comprehended it." The ceremony continued with the formal signing of the decree and a series of technical presentations about ongoing projects. Mary explained the advances in research with Artemisia sanctus, whose extracts were already in the clinical testing phase for respiratory disease treatments. Laura presented the Complete Creek Recovery Project, which already showed impressive results in water quality and local biodiversity. At the end of the event, while the guests participated in a guided tour of the center's facilities, John returned to the hill where he used to contemplate his land. The sunset painted the horizon with orange and golden hues, creating a breathtaking scenario. He sat on his favorite bench, carved from a fallen old tree, and wasn't surprised when he felt Valor's presence beside him. The horse gently rested, his muzzle on John's shoulder, a gesture of affection that had become routine between them. "We did it, my friend," murmured John, his voice choked with emotion. "This land will be protected long after we're gone." The sound of soft footsteps on the grass announced Mary's arrival. The young agronomist, now internationally recognized for her work, sat beside her grandfather. "Professor Sanders has a theory," she commented, caressing Valor's neck. "He believes that some animals, especially those that deeply coexist with humans for generations, develop a kind of advanced empathic intelligence. It's not just instinct or training, but a true understanding." John smiled. "I don't need scientific theories to know that Valor understands more than most humans." Mary took her grandfather's wrinkled hand in hers. "Grandpa, there's something I want to show you." She took an envelope from her pocket and handed it to John. "It arrived this morning." The old farmer opened the envelope with curiosity. It was a letter from the country's most prestigious scientific journal, confirming the publication of Mary's article about Artemisia sanctus, with special emphasis on the sustainable cultivation method developed on the Sullivan farm. "This is wonderful, my girl," exclaimed John with teary eyes. "There's more," continued Mary, turning the page. "See the dedication." John adjusted his glasses and read aloud. "This work is dedicated to John Sullivan, my grandfather, who taught me that true wisdom lies in listening to the land, and to Valor, the extraordinary horse who showed us that intelligence and compassion transcend the barriers between species." A silent tear ran down the old farmer's wrinkled face. Valor, as if understanding the emotion of the moment, gently rested his head on John's shoulder. "You know, Mary," said John, after a few moments of contemplative silence, "when Montgomery first appeared with his offer, I thought I was fighting just for my land, for my family's legacy. I never imagined we would be building something much greater." On the horizon, the first stars began to dot the sky, while the last ray of sunlight tinted the treetops. The creek, now flowing with renewed vigor, reflected the golden light of dusk. "This is just the beginning, Grandpa," replied Mary, hugging her. "Grandfather, what we've built here will inspire other communities, other projects. It's like you always say, a well-planted seed bears fruit for generations." John nodded, deeply moved. He looked at Valor, at Mary, and at the land that stretched before him, the same land he had almost lost, and that now flourished with a renewed purpose. It wasn't just a piece of ground, but a living symbol of resistance, renewal, and hope. "That's what matters in the end," concluded John, his serene voice carrying the wisdom of a lifetime. "Not what we possess, but the legacy we leave. And this legacy will continue long after us, in the people who share our values, in the land we nourish, and in the stories they will tell about an old farmer and his extraordinary white horse." Valor whinnied softly as if agreeing, and together man, granddaughter, and horse contemplated the horizon, where the future they had helped shape unfolded with infinite possibilities.